When you're talking about something as huge as someone shooting his wife and committing suicide, you've got to figure there's a lot more to it than throwing one baseball and seeing it go over a fence.
And I'm thinking, oh, Lord, we got a lot of family at the house. My father-in-law and mother-in-law. My mom being there. Oh, my God. Gonna hit the fan when we get home.
A lot of people forget the game did not end with the home run that David Henderson hit. It's amazing how many people forget that.
To have the situation happen in the top of the ninth, and then to come back in the bottom of the ninth and still score a run to tie it back up, that showed a lot of character in that team.
The Angels loaded the bases against Steve Crawford, a Boston reliever who was making his first playoff appearance. There was only one out, and Crawford was one pitch away from sending the Angels to the World Series.
If I give up a walk here, or a long sacrifice fly, will I ever be able to come back to Boston? It was a scary moment.
They had the winning run on third base with only one out and one of their best and most productive hitters up in Doug DeCinces. And Doug DeCinces knew as he went to the plate, all he had to do was just hit a deep fly ball. DeCinces could have won the game. In that situation, almost anything you do wins the game, you know. But a pop-up doesn't.
The catch, and they can't take the chance. The next batter was 17-year veteran Bobby Grich.
I couldn't even spit. I was so dry mouthed. I mean, I was like spitting cotton. Bobby came up, and I started him out with 2-0 count, 2 straight balls. And that's when I started this can't happen.
This whole ride we've been on today belongs to Disneyland.
I've got a groove of pitch right here. Another ball ran back on him and hit that little soft line drive right to me. And I caught that. I looked in the air and I said, thank you, Lord Jesus. I said, thank you for getting me out of this.
Doug DeCinces swings at a bad 2-0 pitch, and whoever, I think it was Bobby Grich, swung at a bad pitch. Mark, Bob Boone, guys like Reggie Jackson, they were more upset about those terrible bats against a pitcher who was self-destructing on the mound. Was just going down like butter on the mound. That's what they were all talking about, not Donnie Moore. Donnie Moore wasn't considered the GOAT of that game. Doug DeCinces was.
Donnie Moore shut out the Red Sox in the top of the 10th inning. So had the Angels scored in the bottom of the 10th, Donnie Moore would have been the winning pitcher. It would have been a different thing. Donnie Moore would have been a hero, and perhaps the rest of his life would have unfolded differently.
Moore went out for the 11th, and he promptly loaded the bases with the first 3 Red Sox hitters. Then, he gave up a sacrifice fly to Henderson that scored the winning run. Red Sox lead 7-6. In the bottom of the 11th, the Angels went meekly.
It was probably the most important win besides my first Major League win ever. I mean, it's hard to explain how great the feeling was when we won.
It was a Houdini act, that whole game. I mean, but that's baseball. It was a great game, and once we won that game, even though we were down 3-2 in the series, once that game was over, we had it won.
I mean, it was a great plane flight home. We're completely exhausted, but yet we're singing and dancing and having a great time. It was just a great ride home.
But for Moore, there was no escape. At every turn, Henderson's home run was being replayed.
Right after the game, you turn the news on. Click, click. The sportscasters in, I mean, the TV, Donnie this, Donnie that.
Be able to take the bitter with the sweet, and this is real bitter. You also have to remember that for Game 5 of the American League Championship Series, Donnie's family had come out to Anaheim to watch this. So he had all of his family, his friends, his parents, all of these people who were there to see him at what could have been the highlight of his baseball career.
When Moore returned that night to his dream house, he brought a budding rage with him and cooked it in alcohol.
All of a sudden, I thought, okay, I'm saying this to myself. If he has one more drink and they ask him one more question, he's going to hit the fan.
At a certain point, she told her mother, you know, go to bed, close the door, and do not open that door no matter what you hear.
She went in her room, sure enough, he let everybody have it. He cleaned the whole house out.
Despite the wrenching loss, the Angels still needed only one more win to reach the World Series. They might as well have needed a dozen.
They were in good shape, but it never felt like they ever had any momentum.
There was just something missing that we couldn't break through. Psychologically, we just couldn't overcome what happened in Game 5. It was just too devastating, I think.
We just took it away from them on Game 6 and 7.
The Angels never came out of their shell shock and lost Game 6 and 7 to the Red Sox by a combined 13 runs. And Moore faced a cruel and merciless winter.
After Donnie gave up the home run, things were never really good again. He felt that he had let his manager down, that he had let his teammates down, that he had let the entire ball club down.
When you go out in public, all people see is that pitch. They don't see a person. You're not allowed to make any mistakes, especially not during a playoff. You know, like, they actually think he wanted to give up a home run during a playoff. Right.
When frustration overloaded his circuits, Moore turned to the same release to which he always turned.
You know, I'd go over to the house and she'd have a cast on her wrist one day, and then I'd see bruises. And then finally, I remember I saw a black eye and bruises. And I asked her point blank, I said, what's going on here?
No matter how I tried to avoid getting my ass whooped, I would always get it, no matter what. I could cough the wrong way. And if he was in one of these little funky moods or something that happened to him out there in the ballpark, and he started drinking a little Jack Daniels and he couldn't handle it, I would pay for it.
And I told him, I says, you know, you gotta realize something, Donnie. I says, you gotta stop hitting your wife. And he got very defensive. We reached an understanding. Stop hitting your wife. And it lasted for a while, but sure enough, the pressures of trying to play baseball, it comes back, and next thing you know, he's abusive to her again.
Donnie Moore reported to spring training in 1987, intent on a fresh start. He was determined to make the Dave Henderson home run history, but it remained a current event.
I remember talking to him first day of spring training the next year, and he said, you know, this is over, I'm going to move on, but I don't think he ever did.
The following year, a lot of the media often referred back to the postseason. And so he had to hear it again and again and again.
But he couldn't get rid of it. I think it was, for lack of a better word, devastating to Donnie.
On several occasions, he called me over to his locker and say, why do you keep focusing on just that? You know, it wasn't just me. And he was right. He was just the focal point for all the frustration from in 1986.
The fans roasted him at almost every opportunity, success or failure.
Of course, last night when the teams were announced out on the field, whenever he was announced, he got a few moves, and I'm sure that's, as long as he's with this club, they will follow him as long as he is here.
Every time he came in, the fans booed him. He'd have a good game and they'd boo him. You know, he had a bad game, they'd boo him.
Well, baseball fans are never reluctant to let the players know when they are unhappy with them. But in certain cases, like in Donnie Moore's case, I think that the level of the abuse, the volume of the boos, really exceeded the norm.
About a guy making $1 million a year and have 1 or 2 good years in a row and build that thing up to $1 million. Johnny just shakes his head.
And they were so cruel to him. How do they expect a human being to go out and make amends when you don't even allow him to step out the bullpen?
You walk from that bullpen in Angel Stadium out to the mound and having 50-some thousand people booing at you, it's difficult.
It got to the point where Donnie didn't want to come out because of the fans. He'd rather pitch on the road.
When you've got an 8-year-old calling you names and his dad standing right there, not slapping him upside the head for using that kind of language, it's hard.
I think what bothered him more was at least a perceived feeling that his teammates blamed him for losing. I know I got the feeling from him and being in the clubhouse and watching him interact with his teammates the year after versus the year before that something had changed in the clubhouse.
The back pain that had plagued him in 1986 was so excruciating in 1987 that he appeared in only 14 games and was on the disabled list for more than half the season. It did not help his cause when Angel team doctors couldn't locate the source of the pain.
And he'd come home, he goes, you know, I'm telling them that something's wrong. I says, well, who are you talking to? I'm talking to the doctor. Well, Don, we can't find anything in the arm. Here, let's give you another shot.
Last year, a lot of the Angel players didn't think that he had really done all he could to pitch with a little pain.
A lot of people implied that Donnie had lost his will to pitch after the season before. and that his malingering or his feigning injury was a way of saying, I don't want to go back there again.
The frustration began to wear on Moore.
As he continued to struggle as a pitcher, he was very irritable and moody, snapped at people.
Sometimes he could get, surly is not the right word, somewhat distant. You know, one minute you think, well, here's the angriest man I've ever met. And then the next minute, he come over and slap you on the back. Great job, glad we could pull this one out.
I think his pain is one of the main things, you know, that really got him down. And he could have been figuring that if I hadn't have been hurting, you know, I could have done a better job.
He was under a lot of pressure. I mean, he had a family to take care of. And in order to take care of this family, you got to be able to go out there and get them out.
It's not just to feed his own ego, it's to feed his kids.
I don't think you can separate what happens on the baseball field from a player's personal life. Because obviously all of us, any of us would take home negative events at work. And Donnie was dealing with a lot of frustration. It was difficult for Donnie to deal with failure.
In September, Angels general manager Mike Fort gave public voice to what many had been whispering. He accused Moore of malingering.
Mike Fort, the general manager, lost his temper, and he just blasted Donnie. Basically said, this guy ought to stop complaining and get out there and pitch.
And I think to the fans, hearing this from an insider justified all of their worst suspicions in a way. And you know, here was proof that this guy was only doing it for the money and wasn't really working.
But when management takes shots at you unjustly, you know, that's really what upsets players the most.
I remember talking to Rod Carew, who was a very close friend of Donnie's on that team. Carew's reaction was, you know, I just felt like decking Mike Fort. And I think, you know, my guess is if you talk to Rod Carew today, he would still feel the same way.
A month after Moore was accused of malingering, the reliever underwent back surgery, where the doctor removed a bone chip the size of a dime, pressing against his spine.
They said it was going to be about an hour and a half. The surgery was 5 hours. It was a very serious operation.
When the diagnosis actually came down and showed that he had a problem, he felt, now maybe people will see that that wasn't the case, that the reason I was having pain was in reality I was having pain, not because I was faking.
And in a sense, I think the damage had been done. It's not as if the fans said, oh, you needed 5 hours of surgery, well, let's stop booing him. Things didn't change just because he really did have a health problem.
I've never seen an athlete booed and treated as harshly as Donnie was. It was obvious he couldn't pitch for the Angels anymore.
In 1988, the final year of his contract, Moore appeared in just 27 games, compiling a 4.91 ERA. In late August, he was reactivated from his second stint on the disabled list and then released that day by the Angels.
This is very horrible. Horrible. Wondering what you're going to do next. And how long your money's going to last, or if you made the right investments, or what you got to do next to pay a bill. It's bad.
Devastating. And he felt that the Angels did not stand behind him when he needed them.
I'm sure he was bitter because he really had done a lot in a relatively short time for the Angels, and he knew, and everyone knew, that if Dave Henderson swings and misses, Donnie Moore's probably an Angel for life.
I knew as long as I had baseball in our lives, I would be safe. I wouldn't have to worry about him wanting to destroy the whole family. But baseball was his life. I mean, he knows nothing else. So without that, what else is he supposed to do?
I think that what he was processing internally, we may never know, but I don't know that I will ever be able to understand the size of the time bomb.
Moore was going to get one last chance. In the spring of 1989, he worked out for Al Kubsky, a Kansas City Royals scout.
He had a pretty good slider, and that football had some action on it. When we talked when it was over, we said, what did I impress you? Well, I was honest with him. I feel like you did all right. You're not Superman. You don't have the arm you had originally, but you had 3 pitches, and that split finger did enough to say, hey, I can get people out.
Moore thought he had made the team in spring training, but the Royals sent him to their AAA team in Omaha.
And he took that offer from Kansas City, and it was a nothing offer. You go from $1 million to nothing. And now he's looking, he says, this is it. If I don't make Kansas City, I'm out of here.
First they told him he made the team, and then they cut him. Then they told him that when Omaha plays the big league team, he's going to pitch, and if he does well, he's going to leave with the team. And of course they didn't do none of that.
In Omaha, Moore found an unlikely teammate, Steve Crawford, the winning pitcher in Game 5 of the 1986 ALCS, the very game that had launched Moore's descent into despair.
A lot of jokes and laughs and teasing each other. And one of the players might say, hey, Donnie, what was that pitch you threw Henderson? I threw a hanging split ear or something, this and that. Or, you know, he accepted it. He was able to get teased about it.
Yeah, I don't think it was teasing, to tell you the truth. I think it was the type of thing that an old man is down in the minor leagues and you need to retire, and why are you here taking up space where a younger player could be? I think it had a lot to do with being evil and rude and mean.
On June 12, 1989, barely 3 months into his comeback, Moore was released. For the first time since he was a child, he faced the frightening prospect of a tomorrow that had no baseball in it.
Donnie was upset in terms of not knowing what was in the future for him and his family. He had 3 children, he had a wife, he had a very nice home with a mortgage. Suddenly, the brakes get applied. Now, you don't have a $3 million contract. Matter of fact, you don't have any contract. No one's calling, including your agent is not calling you back. No one's shopping you to anyone else.
Everything was falling apart for Donnie. His marriage, his baseball career, he had financial problems.
It's like his whole world is collapsing around him. It's collapsing at home, it's collapsing on the baseball field, and in his head most of all.
On the day that baseball told him it no longer had room for him, Moore called home to tell his wife. He said to expect him in about 6 hours. Something cold ran through Tanya Moore. It was a feeling she recognized all too well.
She had seen a pattern through their entire life together, and she knew that when things were bad, she could expect him to take it out on her, and she knew that this was as bad as it had ever been.
I called Tanya, I said, Tanya, and before I said a word, she was frantic. She says, did you hear? I said, yeah, I heard. I just talked to him on the phone. She says, we're leaving. He's going to kill me.
I said, okay, I can't be here. There's no way I'm going to be here when he comes. I'm not picking him up from the thing. I said, I'm moving. I'm leaving him. I said, if there's baseball anymore, I said, I can't be here. Adios, amigo.
In the 5 weeks between his release from the Royals and the night he took his own life, Donnie Moore retreated into himself, withdrawing from his friends, nursing his bitterness in a lonely, self-imposed exile.
My crew made numerous efforts to try and draw him out. We got to get together. We have to talk. Donnie would promise to come by and then never do it.
After 17 years of marriage, a terrified Tanya Moore moved out. On July 18, 1989, she returned to their home, having been told by her husband that there was a prospective buyer for their dream house.
The man never showed up for me to sign the papers. I'm thinking, where is he? And I get a phone call. I get on the phone. It's my beautician. All of a sudden, he takes the phone from me. He says, you're talking to a man. I said, no, I'm not. He said, yes, you are. And he just knocks the shit out of me. I thought, oh, no. I get up. I go out to see where my kids are. I said, I'm leaving. And he says, I'm sorry, I'm not going to do it again. And I said, no, you promise you won't ever do it again. I'm leaving. And then he excuses himself. He said, I'll be back in a minute.
She and Donnie had argued hours earlier. The argument was over. But then all of a sudden he walked in with a gun.
And I look at him, and he looks at me, and he does this. And I said, I know. You ain't finna kill yourself.
At first, he pointed the gun at his own head, and I think she said to him, in front of the kids, both the boys were there, and then he turned and pointed the gun at her, and shot her 3 times.
I said, you shot me. I said, I really can't believe you shot me. And I remember looking at his eyes, these horrible looking eyes look like demons and stuff. And I can hear my car started. And I see my daughter, and I tell her to help me. I got shot twice again. I got shot here, here, and here. And I remember saying, help me, and I remember her coming back and getting me. And I remember putting me in the backseat of the car. And I remember her screaming to the top of her voice. And I kept saying, you know what? I said, you need to shut up. I said, because I'm dying. I said, I'm really dying. I could feel myself floating away.
Her daughter takes her to the hospital. Donnie's left there.
Donnie's sitting at the table in the kitchen. Little Donnie comes in the kitchen. They're screaming and yelling. Ronnie's there. And he says, what happened? What happened? Where's Mommy? He says, don't worry. I'm going to be with Mommy. And in front of his kids, he shoots himself in the head.
The next thing I remember, there's people everywhere standing all over me. And I can see IVs everywhere. And I remember the lady saying, who are you? What's your name? I said, my name is Donnie Moore. My husband, Donnie Moore, he just shot me, and I don't know where he is at. I kept asking for him. The way I found out my husband was dead, because nobody wouldn't tell me. They had the TV on in my room. And I remember looking up, and I can see him. I can see them bring him out of my house in a green bag. That's how I found out my husband was dead, because I looked on TV. And I saw them bringing him out of my house. He thought he had nothing. He didn't have baseball, and he didn't have me. So there's no need for him to live. And sometimes I feel that if I would have stayed there to get my ass whooped for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, maybe he'd still be alive, and we'd both be dead together anyway.
When the first officer arrived, what he found was a scene that was pretty disturbing, obviously. We found Mr. Moore on the ground. There was a gun very close by.
I'm sure that he thought, I've killed my wife, the media's going to get this, I'm going to jail. And at that point, his only thought was, that's it.
My boys saw their father blew his head off. Donnie picked up the gun and Ronnie removed it from his hands. I didn't think he would do it in front of his children.
I mean, I can understand that people have marital problems, and there was clearly a marital problem involved in this. But this guy loved his kids. Something had to really snap for him to allow his kids to see that happen.
Donnie Moore was laid to rest in his hometown.
The funeral was beautiful and horrible. In the middle of summer in Lubbock, Texas, stifling hot. Everybody's trying to hold on and not cry, and people are crying nonetheless. And there were times when you could hear the whole place just take a collective breath. This guy was still young, and he'd been more successful than anyone ever could have imagined. And something had gone wrong, nobody understood what it was, and now he was gone.
Despite being shot 3 times, Tanya Moore quickly recovered.
They told her when she got to the hospital that it was a miracle, but the bullets had passed through her, and none of them had struck organs or anything that put her in a truly life-threatening position.
Donnie was a duck hunter, and so he had a .45 with loads in it that was for duck hunting, so that when he'd shoot it with a .45, it wouldn't blow it to pieces. So when he shot her 3 times, and it went literally through her and not exploding like a .45 is intended to.
While the wounds of the flesh healed, those of the psyche did not. Tanya Moore has been in and out of psychiatric institutions, and all 3 children have struggled.
I worry more about my children because it's hard for them. It's taken us all through a lot. And a lot of people say, you need to get over it or forget about it. It's over in the past. It's deep and it's scarred.
The 3 kids live in California and they have no life. They have no sense of well-being because they have no father. They're destroyed.
Moore's friends remain mystified and ask questions for which there are not and never will be answers.
I think you have to keep in mind that most of the people who knew Donnie considered him a really good guy, and for this to have happened was very difficult for the people in his life to accept.
I was stunned because I didn't know that person. It was almost like that's somebody's taken his name. That's somebody I don't know. It would have never entered my mind to predict that would happen. I played with a lot of guys that I would have predicted that would happen. But it would have never entered my mind to predict that his life would end the way that it did.
The popular theory was that Moore killed himself over one pitched baseball, the one that Dave Henderson sent over the fence. But those who knew Moore best dispute that notion as too easy, too shallow.
I find it hard to believe that it was cracked by that. You can't thrive in that kind of position without getting used to the idea that sometimes you're going to succeed and sometimes you're going to fail.
I don't think Donnie was that weak. If you're going to ever be distraught to that extent, you'd have done it the night you lost the game. But he went on, and I don't think that's what caused the tragedy.
What was more difficult, I think, was the years that followed when he realized his career was ending and he had to find something else to do with his life. And that, I think, was much more difficult for his psyche.
If you shoot somebody 3 times in which you've had a relationship that's been very violent, using a gun is just an extension of that domestic violence. Murder-suicide is not about suicide usually, it's about domestic violence. And we have to be realistic with that.
It wasn't a jealousy thing. She wasn't having an affair. Donnie was leaving baseball because baseball left him, and he was taking his wife with him.
I think the after fact, the way that the paper handled it, the news handled it, the fans mostly handled the home run, it's what got to him, not the home run.
I don't think the ordinary fan, when they boo someone like that, understands the psychological effect that that can have on any athlete or any performer of any kind, that it's demeaning to them, it destroys their confidence.
We as fans often forget that for these players, while the cheers gradually fade away, the boos linger forever.
Donnie Moore was haunted by the thought that without baseball, he had no way to care for his family. The irony is that after he took his own life, an arbitrator ruled in favor of the players in their collusion case against the owners. Moore was awarded $1.15 million. For SportsCenter Flashback, I'm Reese Davis.